Hi, it's Sharon from SharonTheReader.com. I had a very interesting conversation with someone who I was a major fan of, probably from about the age of 20, and would still remain, I wouldn't say fan, because as you get older you're not a fan, but had a lot of admiration for a guy who I believe was probably one of the best actors of any generation. And even today, and we have brilliant actors today, but this person to me was just completely unbeatable. And that was James Dean. And the reason it came around was a friend of mine had mentioned something about him being homosexual, which in my book personally, it doesn't make a difference. I was just interested in his acting. I was interested in him as a person. So whether he was gay, whether he was straight, whether he's bisexual, it made no difference to me. But one of the things that was interesting was that I then had, normally I get, if I'm going to get anything from anyone, I normally get it in the morning. And I didn't get anything I did, but mainly I got it in the evening before I fell asleep. And I didn't try and contact him because I've said before in many of my podcasts, it's not something I can do. It's not something I can do on will. But he did come through and I had a very interesting conversation with him. Then after that, I must have fallen asleep because I remember being in the local record store, this is my dream, and they had nothing on the shelves. So I had put this down to the coronavirus. This is in the dream. But on the way out through the door, there was this shelf. It was like a box set of James Dean books, James Dean films, all of that. And they had lots and lots and lots of them. So that was in the dream. When I woke up, he then continued with the conversation, which I'm going to tell you about now. I'm not going to lie, there's different things that I think we're all well aware of if you're into James Dean movies or if you're a fan of James Dean. And that is that his mother had died when he was a young boy. And that would be upsetting for any child. But he really went a lot further when he was talking to me. He said that he never had a relationship with anyone that came close to the relationship he had with his mother. He said the relationship he had with his mother was so special that no one ever understood him the way she did. She could read him very well, and it was almost like not a child and their mother, but like two very close souls, two very close people who basically understood each other and really, really got each other. So she was able to kind of bring him almost to a point where he was able to express more of himself than a boy of his age would have been in their growing up, because he was only 9 when she died. And that I know for a fact. But he said that when his mother died, he really felt that he had lost himself. He was lost. And he said that although he was brought up by his aunt and his uncle, and he said he did come to really love them as people. They were really excellent people. But that the more he was with them and the more time that he became, let's say, the child of, even though he wasn't adopted by them, but the child of these people, that it was good for him. It allowed him to kind of expand himself, explore things and stuff like that. So there was a lot of love between him, his aunt and his uncle. It wasn't a matter of he was taken in, he was raised, and that was it. This was a loving family he had. He then said a very, I wouldn't say strange thing, but it was the viewpoint he had on it came across to me as kind of strange. And that was he had a close sexual relationship with an older man when he was actually in his very early teens. And it may have been slightly preteen. Now, coming from my perspective, and probably a lot of people will think the same thing, we would consider this to be, and this was not his uncle, I want to stress that. This was someone he was around a lot, but not his uncle. And he said that the relationship was, as far as he was concerned, to him, it was to do with the closeness. If you take, let's put it like this, and I think this is the way he was sort of putting it across to me. If you take a girl and a guy and they're in a relationship, it's more than just a sexual relationship, it's a relationship. And so they're binding a lot of things together in that they're really getting to know each other on a deep level. And that's what he was taking out of it. He said it filled a need in him. And that need seemed to be a closeness, not within the family that he belonged to, but a closeness to himself and to another human being. He didn't consider it an abusive relationship by any matter of means. He considered it a relationship that he personally felt he needed at that point in time. That relationship went on for quite a few years. I would say between 2-3 years. And at the end of the day, one of the things that I got from what he was saying, that it was fulfilling to him and necessary for him at the time. There was no grievance afterwards when he was maybe, 18, 19, that he'd been abused. There was nothing like that because it was not abusive. It was consensual. What the other person got out of it, he didn't actually reveal to me in any shape or form, but it didn't seem to be a relationship of power play. So, make of that what you will. He also said that when it came to acting, he used it personally as a therapy. And I find this very interesting. It was like it allowed him to discover different parts of himself that were new and that he hadn't explored before. And anything that was explorative for him was valuable. And that was across the board in every respect. But acting was the place that he could actually go into a character, bring himself into the character, and then see what that brought out for him. So I would imagine most actors try to become the character. And he did quite the opposite of that. He used the character to try to find more about himself. And he really seemed to be very, very, very interested in this. His whole thing in life, he said, was really about a pure exploration of himself. He did state in a fashion, and I can't remember exactly how he put it, but it was like, if you know Robert Mapplethorpe, the photographer, Robert Mapplethorpe was wonderful at taking exceptional photographs of other people, but he could never take a photograph of himself that pleased him. Where Dean seemed to work on the opposite, the more he could use the tools that he was given in acting, the more it revealed about himself. And that was his portrait, if you want, was to find out exactly as much as he possibly could about himself. And that, I think, is what he was saying about acting, and that was why it was so enriching to him. And there was no limit. He had no limit whatsoever as to how far he would go with things, how deep he would go into himself, maybe in ways that would affect you and I quite differently. It was an open door. And that's what he used it as. He said, and I'm getting it now because I have it wrote down, he said that the whole thing about acting was an education of himself, to himself and for himself. He also said that although he had friends and there was a lot of people he liked and he respected, that no one really got to know him, not really know him. And that was something that he personally withheld for his own reasons. He didn't explain what the reasons were, but he said that a lot of people were good friends of his, acquaintances, people he worked with, people he knew. And as far as he was concerned, that was fine. They were getting as much of him as he felt they needed. But he was never, and he stated that, he was never about to reveal everything about who he was to any human being. No one. That was personal to him. That was like, it appeared like this was like a treasure chest of his personality, what he was made up of. I wouldn't say values, opinions, it was more the insights of what he was and who he was that went into that treasure chest and was closed. And that was never revealed to anyone. So that basically was the way he looked on it. That was his approach to things. He said he did know himself exceptionally well. He had put a lot of work into that, and as far as he was concerned, it was very rewarding. So you really were talking about a very complex personality here. And even as he was talking, I can't say that he was cold, because he wasn't a cold personality. It's a personality that I've never come across before. It was an essence of, again, revealing what he wanted to reveal and still holding back the rest of himself. You wouldn't say that you either disliked him, because he was not a dislikable person. He was actually fairly giving. He wasn't a fun person, but he did have a sense of humour. And also, I think the depth of the personality was very captivating. It captivated me in that he allowed you to know what he wanted you to know, and after that, that was it. But there was no rudeness, there was no coldness, there was nothing of that type. This was a person who seemed to embrace two worlds at the same time. And he did say that. He said that, and I think we're probably talking more towards the time when he started to act than just after his mother's death, because I think he had that little break in between and he was able to work on himself, but just not the same way. But I did get the impression that the whole work on himself would have been possibly round about the maybe 14-year-old mark, right? That's when he would have really started to explore himself. And it wasn't even opinions. It was, why would I do this? Why wouldn't I do that? What does that mean to me? How do I feel about that? It wasn't an opinion thing. It was just a complete self-exploration. He didn't really have time for clothes, preening himself, superstardom. There was nothing of that had any effect on him. There was nothing of that had any interest to him. Basically, what he was who he was. So, yeah, for a part, he could portray a certain image. But for himself personally, he really didn't have a lot of interest in that. That was not an interest he had. His interest was solely internal. And from internal was exactly where he worked. And maybe that's what made him such a great actor. He certainly said he had no wish to fit into any mould. So the Hollywood lifestyle was not one that he wanted. I wouldn't say he appreciated it. But it did give him the feel of breaking through more. Theatre was one thing, then acting on screen was a totally different experience, and experience was what he lived for anyway. Molding him to be a different type of star, the hair, the makeup, the clothes, the look, wasn't his thing. It just wasn't his thing. He just was completely raw. And I think that's possibly what made him the actor he was. He also said that there was an amazing love of books and poetry. And he said that really came from his very early days as a child. And it progressed right through. So this was a guy who was a very intelligent person, but at the same time was more into the self-teaching of what he needed. Not what other people thought was good for him, but what he thought was enriching to him educationally. He said that other people fall in love and, they find the right person, or they'll go through a lot of people, or they'll have affairs, or whatever it happens to be. He said that really there was only one girl that he felt that he could have been in love with. Not that he was, that he could have been in love with. And that was a friend of both, a friend of his and a friend that he knew. She was a friend of both of them. And he said he had no idea at the time, but that actually, looking back from where he was now, was actually the girl that most likely he would have came closest to being in love with. But he said, truthfully, he didn't believe that he was ever, or he had ever fallen in love. And I guess at the age that he died, which was, I think, 23, I'm sure about that. Some of us may have been in love. Some of us may have fallen in love at that stage. Some of us may not have even known what love was at that stage. He seemed to feel that he'd fell into the latter. He didn't feel that he had enough to give at that point to actually be in love with anyone. He also said that while the Hollywood lifestyle was not one that he was interested in really, that when it came to drugs, he said, yes, he dabbled, but it was very little and it was very light. So drugs were not a thing with him. He also said that drink, he could have a drink, and that wouldn't have been a problem, but he wasn't interested in becoming drunk. He could have a beer, and that was refreshing, that was fine with a friend, have a chat, but when it came to drinking for the evening, not his thing. He had no interest. That would have taken him away from the whole education of himself, which was exactly what he wanted. He also said that he did not have a desire to die young. That was not his thing. A lot of people say, live young, die young, and he said that was not at all what he was thinking of. It was more live on the edge, find out as much as you can, take it to the complete limit if you can, and continue to live and find out more. But at no stage did he intend to have an early death. He did, however, say that the end, as far as he was concerned, wasn't really a massive changeover for him, because he said he embraced two worlds at the one time. So it was kind of strange to listen to that, because I would say that listening to him and the fact that he let you see him as a child, you didn't get the impression that at the end of the day, this kid wanted to die young. There was none of that. It was just that the more he grew, the more he wanted to know. And the more he wanted to know, the more he put himself on the edge. But he did say that when it came to life, and I would say it would be round about the, maybe again, 14 years of age. He'd probably been living it before then, but he wasn't aware of it. He was actually living between two worlds. And that's why the crossing over was not a shock to him. It didn't bother him. it really didn't do anything. It just brought him into another experience, which was the death experience. So you're talking about a very complex personality here. And it's kind of hard to understand that, because psychically, I think all psychics, we tip between two worlds. But it doesn't mean to say that we don't live totally in this world. We're just getting a flash from another world, another life. Whereas with Dean, it seemed to be that he actually was living between two worlds. And I think that really, it started, I do believe, with his mother's death. Because I think that he held on so tight to that it brought him completely out of body whilst remaining in this world. So with 50% out of body in the other world, and with 50% in body in this world. So he did straddle both at the same time. I will say that, personally speaking, I think we have tremendous actors today. I just think that with James Dean, what we did have was, we had a guy who was breaking the boundaries. And I think Brando would have been pretty close. So on that one, I will say I find him a very fascinating personality. And I think that anyone who was speaking to him, while he was in this world, probably would say the same as I'm saying now. You don't really get to know all of James Dean. There's more there. There's levels upon levels upon levels upon levels of layers. And what he gives you, and it's not that he deliberately holds back, he tells you what he needs you to know. He did say that the Hollywood couch thing, that was also there, as a young actor. Like a lot of the Me Too movement today was also there for him. And that if it progressed his career and if it got him what he needed, then as far as he was concerned, it wasn't prostitution. For him, it was kind of like, okay, I'll do this if I get that. So it was like an exchange. I would honestly say he was probably the closest thing to energy than you would find in a human being. Because we're all made of energy, and I've said that many times before, but, we are aware of how we dress, how our hair is, things like that. He really didn't give a damn. What he was concerned with was the inside. It was all about the inside. It was completely internal. And that was the thing, I think, that made him the actor that he was. And if he didn't reveal everything about himself, I found him to be a very genuine person, a very nice person, a warm human being. And if he didn't give everything of himself to anyone, I don't think we could blame him on that. I think he played it his way, and he didn't hurt anyone in the playing the game. So personally speaking, I didn't feel as if he was holding back deliberately. I think he was giving what he had, and I felt quite privileged to have been given that. Odd one, James Dean? Yeah, because we're looking back. It's not a person that's with us at the moment or has just passed on. But I would honestly say, having been a fan, having been a person who respected his work, I think it was quite interesting. He was a very interesting person. Would we ever get to the bottom of him? I don't think so. Has he got to the bottom of himself? I would say he worked hard enough. He got to the bottom of himself. Also, he had no desire to come back. He made that perfectly clear. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'm just going to say, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, These are troubling times. Stay safe, stay well. God bless, and speak again. Goodbye.